What's that? Well, all I know is they got in trouble for having patches on their uniforms that said 3%, and there were some media who confused the three percenter movement with the Oath Keepers. As I said, they're very distinct. You already interviewed Mike. What they do have in common, though, is we both stand for the Founders Republic. We both stand for the Constitution as originally understood by the folks who ratified it. And I don't mean to freeze it in 1787. What I mean is that the original intent of the founders and the original intent of all the drafters for every amendment since has still been the same, that you have a government of limited powers that is constrained and divided powers as well. And I think what the problem we have today is you have both in the political left and the right, both Democrats and Republicans, a consensus of believing in unlimited powers in the government. And this goes not just to gun control, but also to confining Americans in military detention without trial, to killing Americans, as already been done by the Obama administration. And a lot of these concepts are the president's powers as commander in chief in wartime and for national security, including spying on Americans without warrant, as the NSA has now been caught doing. So all of this stuff we think is kind of a symptom of the same disease, which is kind of a totalitarian mindset and totalitarian desire among the political elite to just do whatever they want. Yeah, I'm a graduate of Yale Law School. That's correct. Well, it's kind of weird. During when I was in law school, I was in law school when the 9/11 attacks hit, and in the aftermath of 9/11 attacks, you saw the Bush administration insisting that you had to sacrifice liberty for security. You had to, update the Constitution, and this is the modern era of terrorism. And it was while I was a student there, I was critical of all of that, and because I criticized a Republican, a lot of people thought I was a liberal, and a lot of the liberal students liked me. But now that there's a Democrat in power, he's doing much the same thing, continuing on the same national security state, infrastructure building. Now I get criticized, and they say, well, you must be a radical right winger, and you must be a hypocrite. They assumed that I was a Bush lover and I was a hypocrite during his time. And now they criticize me because I'm daring to criticize the president. They assume I must be a racist. They assume all these pejoratives. And I'm just being consistent. I didn't like what Bush did. I thought he was one of the worst presidents we had constitutionally. But unfortunately, Obama is carrying it on. So I'm going to criticize both of them. And so depending upon who's in office is who attacks me and sees me and calls me a traitor. So it's kind of sad. But I think the salvation for the Constitution is going to come from a third quarter of the population that is more consistent, that doesn't care whether it's left or right in power. They want to defend the Constitution no matter who's in office. And so that's where we are. That's where we stand, and I think that's what we want to encourage more of. And so it's folks who walk up nowadays and shake my hand. Some of them were asleep at the switch during the Bush years and are only afraid now that it's the bad guy on the other side of the aisle. But the Democrats were the same way. That's just part of human nature. But there are many folks who are waking up to the dangers from both sides. They see that John McCain wrote the detention provisions in the NDAA. They see that Romney said he would have signed it too. So they understand there's not really a whole lot of difference between the two parties when it comes to the destruction of the Constitution. Well, the main difference is their emphasis is on. Well, I mean, Mike, as Mike probably told you, they stand in defense of the Constitution and all of it. But there's a big emphasis. But there's a big emphasis on refusing to comply with any further infringements on the right to bear arms. You know, their mantra is, "We backed up as far as we're going to back up. We're not going to go any further." Oath keepers, I think, are the same mindset. I wrote in the wake of what happened in Newtown and the drive for more infringements on the right to bear arms. I wrote a personal pledge saying that I'm not going to comply with any further you know infringements on the Second Amendment. And I think a lot of our members feel the same way. But we want to be a little bit broader. We want to defend all of the Bill of Rights. That's why you look at our Declaration of 10 Orders we will not obey from the perspective of active duty oath keepers. It starts off with gun confiscation, but it's not that we think that's the most important part of the Constitution. We just think it's the most likely to lead to open conflict, as happened in the Revolutionary War. April 19, 1775 was an attempt to go and confiscate firearms, which sparked the American Revolution. But I always point out that they were going after people as well. They were going after John Hancock and Sam Adams, the leaders of the resistance. They were going to go and grab them and hold them in military detention. And it was the denial of jury trial was one of the causes of the American Revolution. Warrantless searches, which back then were called the writs of assistance. So there's a lot more to it than just gun confiscation. I think a lot of Americans today kind of have and unfortunately, a kind of constricted viewpoint of the causes of the American Revolution. It wasn't just taxation without representation either. It was all of these abuses of the rights of Englishmen that the government needed to do in order to clamp down on dissent and to clamp down on smugglers like John Hancock. They were going to go after these guys. They wouldn't be found guilty by a jury of their peers, so of course they had to deny jury trial. And so we see the same thing starting to happen again. A lot of the same pieces are being put into place now. And we can add to their experience the experience we saw in the 20th century, the dictatorships, whether it's Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia or Mao's China. You saw the same thing. You saw a setting aside of normal due process and the normal rights of people because the government decided that they had to go after these bad guys. And they used the excuse of external threat or internal threat to get the population so afraid that they're willing to set aside normal due process. And they create a second track. Like in Germany with the people's courts, that's what they were called, were courts packed with Nazi judges, and you didn't get a normal trial like a normal criminal. If you're a political criminal, you were sent to these Nazi-run people's courts, and of course it was a show trial, a total kangaroo court, and then off to the detention camps you went. And the same thing happened in Stalinist Russia. You had show trials and coerced confessions, coerced by torture, and no real due process. And we're seeing the same thing happen now. But now they say it's the laws of war. They're saying that under the laws of war, the president can apply the laws of war to American citizens and set aside your right to a grand jury indictment, your right to a jury trial, and treat you the same as a foreign enemy in wartime. And we point out as well that the Article 3 of the Constitution is directly on point. It tells you that the trial of all crimes must be by jury. It's Article 3, Section 2. And then the very next section, Article 3, Section 3, it defines the crime of treason as making war against the United States or aiding its enemies, and it adds on the extrajudicial protections of requiring two witnesses to the same overt act or confession in open court. And so the founders gave you extra protections if you're accused of making war against your own country. And so all of this nonsense talk about setting all that aside, applying the laws of war, and just military detention at the say-so of the president alone, or even military tribunal in front of a select panel of officers handpicked by the president, all of that is completely upside down and outside of the Constitution. And even worse is the idea the president just kill you, which is what Obama's begun to do, is kill Americans. He killed al-Awlaki and his teenage son, a 16-year-old kid in Yemen. And a lot of Americans, they think, well, that's no big deal. They were way over there. There's no legal difference between them and you. That's the problem. Well, I think it's pretty clear that Snowden revealed. We don't defend what Snowden did when it came to disclosing our intelligence operations against foreign nations. I want to be clear on that. But we do defend, and what he did right was to expose to the American people the NSA spying on us without warrant. In that, he kept his oath. And so we had billboards that were just up at the Pentagon station in DC Metro that said just that. Snowden honored his oath, honor yours, expose crimes against the Constitution, which is what he exposed. And a lot of his critics are saying, well, he had normal channels he could have gone through. Prior whistleblowers, I believe one of them was named Drake, prior whistleblowers against the NSA have all told us that, look, they tried to do that, it went nowhere. How does he blow the whistle when it's the president himself and his chain of command right down the line that is violating the Constitution? You can't report criminality to the criminals. You got to report the criminality to the actual bosses, which are we the people. When the entire government is run and dominated by oath breakers who are violating the Constitution plainly, you have to report it to the people themselves. And that's what Snowden did, and that's what Manning did. And Manning's gotten the same criticism. Oh, he should have gone through normal channels. The normal channels were fine with it and were covering it up. And it reminds me very much of My Lai. When Warrant Officer Thompson first exposed My Lai, he had to do so to the media because it was being brushed under the rug and being covered up. And so it's the same story again and again. The government, when it's dominated by those who are violating their oath, is not going to police itself. The people have to police it. Right. Well, I mean, well, ideally, what we'd like to see is a renaissance of devotion to the Constitution first and not to party. To fix this politically, what you'd have to have is both Republicans and Democrats who set aside their loyalty to their party long enough to purge out the oath breakers from both parties. And what that means is to stop buying the lesser of two evils argument, stop defending evil when your own party does it. This is the bad cycle we're in. We've got Republicans who will knowingly vote for someone they know has already violated his oath. Look at Romney. He voted for, or he signed into law, the assault weapons ban of Massachusetts. From the perspective of a conservative who believes in the Second Amendment, that should have been the third rail. His career should have been done. He said during the debates that he would have signed the NDAA of 2012, that he's fine with Obama having that power of life and death over all of us, and that he trusts him with it. From the perspective of a libertarian or a civil libertarian, that should have been the end of his career also. And the same is true on the Democratic side. You got a president who, like you said, promised to shut down Guantanamo, didn't do it, has begun to kill Americans using the same logic that under Bush was so demonized, rightfully so, and criticized by Democrats, and yet they still vote for him. And so both parties need to purge out the oath breakers within their ranks. And until you see that happen, we're going to have this continual cycle of always having an oath-breaking Constitution killer in office. And our only real salvation, as I said, is that third part of the population that is growing from both the left and the right, that's more consistent and is willing to say no to their own party, to say no, we will not vote for an oath breaker. That's really our own salvation. And I think that because of the internet and the free exchange of ideas, you're getting that third part is growing larger and larger. And I think that's what the political elites don't want. That's why you see John McCain calling Tea Party movement hobbits and criticizing anybody who is upset about the NDAA, calling them nuts and insane, even though he says very openly that, yes, it does apply to American citizens. So you have the neocon cabal, which within the Republican Party, that is very totalitarian-minded, but then you have the counterpart inside of the Liberal Party, inside the Democrats. Whatever you want to call them, neoliberals, whatever their handle is, they have the same mindset and they have the same sense of unlimited power in the hands of the government. So that's our real enemy. It's not Democrat versus Republican. It's really totalitarian versus liberty. That's the real paradigm is between those two. Right. That's why it's no shock that you have. That's why it's no shock that you have the major Wall Street players donating to both campaigns, for example. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Whether it's Republican or Democrat doesn't matter to them because they're going to dominate either way. Well, one thing is that there's a difference between belonging to an organization and then also putting on a patch. There are regulations on what you can and cannot have on your uniform. And we've gotten photos back from guys in Afghanistan and Iraq who had put three percenter and Oath Keeper tabs on when they've gone outside the wire, gone out on patrols, things like that. And a lot of guys do that. They'll put on morale patches and tabs. And so, things that are done in a combat zone outside the green zone are far different than what's done here stateside. So there's that one difference. But other than that, other than possibly getting in trouble for not wearing the proper patches, we've never had yet an Oath Keeper lose their security clearance or have any official sanction against them because we've been very careful in what we do. If someone in our organization starts talking about overthrowing the U.S. government, we kick them out. Make it very clear in our bylaws that's not what we're about. And if someone discusses unlawful actions or use of force, we kick them out. The mission of Oath Keepers is to reach out to the current serving to get them to understand that they have to say no to unconstitutional orders. As you know, when you served in the military, we're all taught when it comes to laws of war, a pretty decent job is taught to teach them about what's legal and not legal under the laws of war. And they're taught that they have a duty to refuse unlawful orders. They're taught about Nuremberg or My Lai, or later, most lately, it's probably Abu Ghraib as an example that's used. But they don't get enough education, we think, on the Bill of Rights. And so when they're used domestically, like in Katrina, where they start to violate the rights of American citizens under the Bill of Rights, that's a serious problem. And so we want to cure that ignorance. Let's just face it, most Americans don't even understand what's in the Bill of Rights. They don't even know because they weren't taught in high school. They just don't know what's in there. And so our troops, if they're going to be used here at home, and the same goes for police, they need to understand the Bill of Rights. So that's all we're really doing is saying, look, we want them to understand it. And not that we want them to follow our direction to the letter. We want them to understand that we have our opinion and we'll express it. We want them to go and do their own research and their own thinking hard about where the lines are, what's legal and not legal under our Bill of Rights. And so I guess for that, this shows you how corrupt the political system really is. Because we dared to encourage them to say no to violating the Bill of Rights, we get attacked by the political elite of both sides. They don't like that. They want them to just follow their orders. And the argument is, as well, it's not up to the individual soldier to say no. It's that's later on for the courts to decide. Well, that didn't work at My Lai. Lieutenant Calley defended himself by saying, I was just following the superior orders of a superior officer. That's not a valid defense. It wasn't a valid defense at Nuremberg either. The Nazis had the same defense. They have an individual duty to say no. They may later on, when they're called on the carpet for saying no to an order, it could go badly either way. If you obey a order that you thought was lawful, it turns out to be unlawful, you're on the hook, like Lieutenant Calley was. If you refuse to obey an order that turned out to have been lawful, you can be sent to Leavenworth for refusing a lawful order. So you're on the hook either way. That's the message to the current serving is, look, guys, you're in the hot seat either way, whether the order's lawful or not. You have to make a decision yourself right there. It might not turn out well for you in front of a military commission, but you still have that duty. Oh, you mean the one that says it's like a fake news article. It says extremists have fired on government troops. That one? Yeah, that's been floating around since the 90s actually. Someone just did a rewrite. They did a rewrite of April 19, 1775 as though it were being presented today, and from the perspective of your mainstream media. I mean, mainstream media in this country, I think probably potentially deserves the label of being state media. Most people see the mainstream media as being akin to Pravda during the Soviet Union. Because it's so lockstep, monolithic in the perspective, and you're an exception to the rule. And hats off to you. But this is why they did that. It's kind of a poke at the current political elites and the media that dominates them. That if anybody were to dare resist the government in any way, they'd be seen in the same light. And it'd be no surprise. No government's ever going to say, yeah, you're right. We're abusive. We're tyrannical. You have a right to resist us. No government's ever going to do that. So, of course, they would demonize. The founding fathers today would be demonized. In fact, we have a new billboard going up it's going to show the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and it's going to say, tyrants always label patriots as traitors. And then it's going to say, Snowden is a patriot. Silence is treason. So it's no surprise that you're getting the same thing today. Of course, Snowden is labeled a traitor. Of course, anyone who opposes the NDAA is labeled anti-government. Anybody who opposes the building this massive data center in Utah is called a crank, or you're called a racist. I mean, I'm a quarter Mexican and also part Indian. I'm not a very good white supremacist. And yet we still get people who say, well, because I'm daring to criticize a black president, it must be because of his race. It can't be because of his policies. And so they'll never accept as legitimate the concerns or the fears of the people in the liberty movement. They'll always say one of the big ones from Southern Poverty Law Center is that I'm spreading baseless conspiracy theory, that I'm scaring people with phantoms of lost liberty that don't exist. And I'm like, what are they not paying attention to what's going on? We had detention of Jose Padilla, the American citizen, detained here in the United States for 3 years, captured at O'Hare International Airport. You had Yasser Hamdi, another American citizen, same thing, 3 years detention. That was done by the Bush administration, upheld by the Supreme Court in Hamdi's case. So they said it's okay. And then you had Congress jumping in with the NDAA of 2012 saying, yes, we affirm that that's all okay. And then you had, with Obama already having killed 2 American citizens, so with full knowledge that Americans are being killed under this claim of war powers by the president, Congress still authorized or renewed their authorization for this kind of detention and power being used on Americans. And so to me, it's like, the things that are right there in your face in the mainstream media that are in law right now, in executive practice, in judicial decrees and decisions, and now by act of Congress, all of that is bad enough. I don't need to worry about conspiracy theories. It's right in your face. And now you have the NDAA, or now you have the NSA admitting that they've been spying on Americans by the millions. And this new big, giant data center in Utah is not meant to try to find Al-Qaeda. It's meant to track all of us and all of our actions. And then they want to have 30,000 drones in the sky. They just approved that for the new regulations for the FAA. So what are they doing? They're setting up, you look at it and go, look, I don't care about the supposed intent or how nice you think the people in power are or are not. That's not the point. The point is structure. And the structure that's being set up is indistinguishable from the Stasi of East Germany. It's total information awareness. It's ratting out your neighbors, secret informants. We just discovered a guy in LA who had been sent by the FBI into Oath Keepers in LA to be a mole or an informant, a paid informant. The guy got drunk at a party, admitted he was a paid informant, and turns out he's a felon. He's not even eligible to belong to the Oath Keepers. We don't let felons be members. But yet we just found out that they'd sent somebody in there to spy on us. Why? What are we really doing that's so dangerous? So it just, this is what we see throughout our history. Back it was COINTELPRO against the civil rights movement. That's, during the 1950s, it was the witch hunt for communists, and you had Hoover writing a letter to the Truman administration, letting them know that they had a list of dissidents who would be rounded up during emergencies and put in military detention. And that list has not gone away. And now it's called Main Corps. That's what they call it. And it's grown, I believe it's like 6 million Americans now are on this list. Of course, you and I will never be able to see it with a FOIA request. They won't show it to you. But it exists. People have leaked out the existence of it. I think back in 2007, Radar Magazine did a piece on it. So we knew this was happening years ago. And so when I founded Oath Keepers back in 2009, that's why you see the first three orders we say will not obey is one, disarmament, two, warrantless searches, and three, detention under military combatant status. Those are the top three things we say we won't do, and they've already happened or are happening right now. So who's the conspiracy theorist? You know? Right. I guess you could ask me at what point do I think this would lead to violence? That's a pretty good question, actually. Right. Well, our goal is to stop. Well, our goal is to stop that from ever happening by trying to get as many in the military and police to say no. That puts the brakes on and gives the American people more time to wake up and fix this politically, to purge out the oath breakers. But unless they purge those oath breakers out of office and do it pretty quick, this government is going down exactly the same path as King George. They're going down the same path as Hitler or Stalin. They're creating the same infrastructure, and at a certain point, you've got to say no. And there came a point, like when you read Solzhenitsyn from the Gulag Archipelago, he says, how he burned in the camps later, mentally burning and wondering what would things have been like if they'd have seen the whole picture and realized they had nothing to lose, but had fought back when the organs of the state came in the middle of the night to come take them off to the Gulag. Many of his friends died in the Gulag. And so they realized later that they should have resisted. What would it have been like if they'd have resisted and ambushed the secret police instead of just waiting for them one by one to come take them away? And so there does come a point where any human being who believes in human freedom has to resist. And it's kind of weird that in our current one of our current political elites, they want you to think that there's never a time when you have any legitimate right to ever resist, that your only recourse is to go to the courts. Well, the courts have already failed us. The courts have already said the president can just come take you whenever he wants to and haul you off to Guantanamo. They've rubber stamped this. And so now our only real check is politics. And that's not how our country was designed to be. So I think that we are like a ticking time bomb situation. There's going to come a point, unless we fix this politically and purge out all these oath breakers, including impeaching some judges and cleaning out the judges who are sustaining this system. Unless we do that, it's going to come to a conflict. There's going to be a time when the machine just keeps going further and further and does not back off and believes that people will not rise up, just like King George did. And there's going to come a flashpoint where they overestimate their power. They step across a serious line, like gun confiscation. But I don't think gun confiscation is the only one. I think that you could look at arbitrary detention without indictment and without trial as another big one. And I've had many veterans, I travel all over the country, many veterans have told me that, look, when they come and start taking away other veterans without due process of law, with no right to a jury trial, then as far as they're concerned, it's on. And so you can see that as another spark. Those are serious tripwires. Arbitrary detention under military detention, confiscation of firearms, an open declaration of martial law, any of these very overt attempts to stomp out dissidents would be a big tripwire, would probably lead to violence. I prefer not to see that happen, but that's what you should look at as your big tripwires. You bet. Anytime. Thank you.